Welcome to Transforming Transformational, the Teach Beyond podcast. I'm Kian.
And I'm Heather. We're here to explore what it means to be transformed in our own lives and how that overflows to living lives of transformational impact in our communities.
This week, we're kicking off our Advent series as we anticipate the celebration of the birth of Christ later this month.
I'm excited to have guests on the podcast with this specific theme in mind again this year. Advent is the period on the church calendar that is characterized by waiting. Advent means coming or arrival, so we are in the season of anticipating the arrival of Jesus, who is the Messiah and our Savior.
As we think about Jesus' birthday, more than 2,000 years ago, we are talking today about the Nativity and how our picture of the Nativity scene might not be all that accurate to how it actually happened.
And actually, I was just visiting my nephew and was talking with him about his little nativity set, and I caught some of that conversation on a recording.
That sounds great. I cannot wait to hear what he has to tell us.
Hey, Judah, what do you know about the nativity?
I don't know.
Well, what is this?
Manger?
It's the manger. And what happens in this story?
Jesus died on the cross.
Oh, that was when he was an adult. What about in the manger? What do we celebrate at Christmas time?
We celebrate, Jesus.
And Jesus came and he was born.
Yeah?
Yeah. Who else was there?
The angels.
Yeah. What did the angels say?
Glory to the angels.
Glory to...
The highest.
Very good. And who else was there?
The shepherds.
The shepherds. And what did the shepherds do?
I don't know.
Did they maybe go and visit Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they went and visited Jesus. And what did they find?
They find the goats.
Oh, there were goats?
No.
They found baby Jesus, and he was
Born.
born. Judah, what gift would you give to baby Jesus if you were going to visit him? What do you think he would want?
Maybe a crown.
A crown. Why would you give him a crown?
Because he was about to die on the cross.
Yeah, he's the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
I love that. That was wonderful.
So fun. Well, our guest today is Jessica L.M. Jenkins, who founded We Who Thirst, which exists to help make biblical scholarship accessible to everyone. And that is what Jessica is going to walk us through today, specifically relating to the story of Jesus' birth.
Jessica is a neurodivergent Bible teacher and podcast host, and she posts regularly on social media as We Who Thirst. We'll link to her website and specifically to an article she wrote about the historically accurate nativity set, if you'd like to learn more after our conversation today.
Jessica has her Master of Arts in Israel Studies and a Master's of Divinity in Biblical Languages. She lives with her husband and 2 children in Austin, Texas.
Let's go over to that conversation with Jessica now.
Welcome to the podcast, Jessica.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jessica, we are so excited to have you here, and we're excited to talk to you about Christmas and the Nativity and all of those things. But in order to start to get to know you, I'd love to know how your family celebrates Christmas and what does Christmas look like around you?
Well, for us for Christmas, we generally keep it fairly small and just focused on our immediate family. I have 2 kids who are in elementary school. My parents and extended family are a day's drive away. My husband's father lives within just a couple hours, so we'll often see him a little bit, and we'll just have a nice Christmas morning on the day doing gifts and those sorts of things. We generally do some sort of Advent devotional and activity for the kids all throughout the month of December, which they are already really looking forward to. So we just enjoy kind of a low-key, quiet family time together.
It's so those are such fun ages this time of year too, as you're anticipating and, looking forward to the birth of Christ, but also taking it slow one day at a time and being intentional with that. I love hearing how you're thinking about that at this season. And we're really excited to be able to use this time to learn more, to maybe deepen our understanding about the nativity, about the Christmas story. And so as we get started, can you back us up, and how did we even get the word nativity? And what's the background for you personally in thinking about the historically accurate nativity? What led you to diving into this?
So the word nativity actually comes from the Latin word for birth. And so
Mm.
the church tradition took the Latin word for birth and brought it into French and then English, which is how our English language gets the word nativity. And it's basically the Latin then French word for birthday or nativity. In English, we
Hmm.
use it exclusively to talk about Jesus' birth, not anybody
Mhm.
else's birthday. But I guess we could for other people's birthday. It's your nativity as well. Um, so, for me personally, I got started with the historically accurate nativity when I was a child. I was about 5 or 6 years old, and my dad had read Kenneth Bailey's work on how baby Jesus was likely born in a peasant home rather than the stable. And so, my dad had gone to seminary, he was a pastor. He wanted his children to have that experience. So, he tried to make a little historically accurate house out of a shoebox for me using whatever little, they might not even be Bible character figures, but whatever little tiny people he had to put in this little shoebox where he cut and pasted and tried to make a little peasant home out of a shoebox. And so fast forward 30 years when I have my own 5 or 6 year old child, and I was like, I really, that's like a core memory for me. And I want that for my children. And I'd also been questioning my entire life, is my dad like accurate on this? Like, I believe my dad, but I also want to verify. So I got in and I did all the deep research and was like, yeah, I think he's absolutely right. And so I did more research because there's more available now than there was in the 90s. I did my own research and then just started designing from there to do the best I could create.
The idea of Jesus not being born in a stable with surrounded by farm animals does seem shocking.
Yeah.
So as we talk about this, and as you've done your research, what are some of the biggest misconceptions, false ways we view this as happening about the nativity?
I think, oh, there's quite a few. I think the biggest one is the stable versus house mentality is probably the biggest one. And then the rest kind of branch off of that. So Jesus was probably born in a house rather than a stable. Animals were kept in homes, like at night they would bring them in, which is why they'd have a manger in their house, though they probably weren't present when he was being born. They probably kicked them out because you don't need a cow in there while a woman's in labor. But also, I think one big misconception that we have is that if you look at any nativity scene, we all have nativity scenes in our houses. If you look at any of them, there's only one woman there, and it's Mary, because the
Mm,
text doesn't name any more women. But if you're considering a house location and you're considering what the original audience of Matthew and Luke would understand, they would know that in a house birth, Mary would be surrounded by family and neighbor women and possible midwives, and so you have this whole community surrounding Mary,
mm,
Joseph, and Jesus, rather than them being shamed and ostracized and pushed away. It's this gathering in and caring for them. So it has a completely different feel.
mm, mm. What is the thought about them having been, yes, to Joseph's hometown, but far from where they were living at the time? What would that look like for them in that case, if you have any thoughts on that?
So they likely, Mary, the angel comes to Mary. She goes and visits Elizabeth for a little while. She goes
Right.
back to Nazareth. And then, sometime between her third month of pregnancy and when she has the baby, we have a 6 month window where Joseph realizes he has to go to Bethlehem to do what the Roman emperor said, to sign up in all of the I'm losing the word, but the census, for the census. And so Joseph, but probably not just Joseph, other extended family. I can't imagine the aunties allowing pregnant Mary to go traveling by herself, miles away from home. And so that we probably were dealing with a caravan, because you don't travel by yourselves. It's not like me and my husband hopping in the car and going to my in-laws. Like, you have to take a caravan of people for safety.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so there's probably Mary and Joseph, extended family, in a caravan traveling from Nazareth to Bethlehem, probably a month or more before she actually gives birth, because they're not stupid and they don't
Mhm.
want her giving birth on the side of the highway, as it were.
Mhm.
And so they're going to be thinking and planning this accordingly.
Mhm. Man, there's so many things that might be, questions that might be coming up in our minds. And we want to dive further into some of these historical details. And
Yeah.
you've created nativity sets, and
Mhm.
that's going to be kind of the framework for us diving in a little bit more. How did you go about researching all of this? Learning, there's all these questions that might have come up for you as well. What what was the research process like for you, and maybe something that surprised you or was a big realization for you?
The research process for me, I started by painting peg dolls, um, after I built the house. So I first started and I researched the house itself and figured out what a house would look like. And I did that through looking at archaeological sources, reading various accounts on people who had hands on experience in the Middle East, both archaeologically and more ethnographic research. So I did that. And then I was painting, I wanted figures, accurate figures to go with my house. So I started painting peg dolls, which for a while I sold the peg doll nativities. Now I just have printable nativities because it's a lot easier to get to more people. So I always have those available. But I started researching, I wanted to have accurate skin tone. So we're not dealing with a white, Caucasian, blue eyed, blonde haired baby Jesus. I wanted these to be ethnically authentic to the region at the time. And I also wanted their clothes to look accurate. If you pick up a typical children's Bible storybook, they are all wearing what I call Bible bathrobes. It's just these robes where Moses and the Apostle Paul all have the exact same clothing, even though we're dealing with completely distinct geographical regions and over 1,000 or 2,000 years worth of time period. Clothing changes, and the pictures I was looking at did not reflect that. So I started looking at archaeology. I looked at the biblical text, the Hebrew and the Greek words for clothing. What is the Hebrew and the Greek describing? And then what can I look at in the archaeological record to pick skin tone colors from the archaeological record, clothing colors, clothing styles, all of that, looking at specific archaeological artifacts to underlie the designs I then came up with.
It's so interesting to think about how the clothing, the house where Jesus was born would impact how the story is understood and kind of what that means.
Yeah.
Um, so as we think about, let's just start with the house. You
Yeah.
mentioned the first century house, a peasant house. What does that look like? Kind of paint a picture for us who, we have no idea what it might look like.
Right. So there's a couple different options we have. We're probably dealing with a peasant house. A rich person's house would kind of be this multi-roomed dwelling. They could have 5 to 10 different rooms in kind of almost a little compound, and one of those rooms might be a separate stable. It's likely baby Jesus was not born in a rich person's home. There's lots of textual reasons for that. A peasant home could be just as simple as a one-room house where you eat, sleep, work, grind grain, sew clothing, make your pottery, have your animals come in at night, all in one room, probably no bigger than like an average bedroom in our house. We're talking like 10 by 10, 15 by 15 single room house. Luke tells us that this house had a guest room. That word in Greek, kataluma, is often what is translated in many English translation as the inn, where we're used to reading in Luke 2, there was no room for them in the inn. The Greek word there is kataluma, which really means guest room. Later in Luke 22 and then in Mark 14, when Jesus comes into Jerusalem for the Last Supper and he sends the disciples to prepare the guest room, it's that same kataluma word. They're not going to a hotel to get a conference room for the Last Supper. They're about to get a guest room at somebody's house. And so Mary and Joseph get to Bethlehem and somebody's already staying in the guest room. The guest room is not available. So this peasant house has at least two rooms. Likely it had a courtyard, maybe even a closed-in courtyard. So they come up to the house, there's a courtyard, they go in, lots of stuff happens in the courtyard, then they can go in the house, there's one room, and then maybe an adjoining guest room alongside. You're going to have a host family. These are likely relatives of Joseph. So an uncle and an aunt, maybe their kids, they might have a son and his wife, their daughter-in-law, they might be living in the guest room. So you have an extended family situation going on here. Or with lots of people traveling for the census, they could just have a higher status guest staying in the guest room.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have your host family, there might be guests in the guest room. There's going to be lots of neighbors nearby. That courtyard I talked about, there may be shared activities that happen where the women get together to do work together in weaving or grinding for grain or various things like that. So it's going to be a very busy scene. It's not going to be sparse like our typical stable scenes where it's just Mary and Joseph and a sheep. You're going to have aunties and host and hostess and kids running around screaming and maybe a chicken flying through. And there's going to be a lot of activity, a lot going on because they kind of envelop Mary and Joseph and just draw them in this rich hospitality that would characterize their culture. They couldn't even dream or fathom of having a pregnant family member go somewhere else. And so they're
Mm.
just going to envelop them in this caring hospitality.
All right, so we have this mental map of this house, and you mentioned peg dolls and imagining the people in that scene. So I'd love to hear
Hmm.
you talk about these
Yeah.
different characters that we would put into the nativity scene and what
Hmm.
what you would want to point out about each of those that would make it historically, ethnically accurate.
So for the clothing, everybody basically wore a robe. It would be a kind of a square robe from the shoulders to, for the men, probably just below the knees. Women might be just above the ankles. And it's just kind of a square robe that they would wear. That's their basic garment. Men would often have stripes like right on the inside of the shoulders, going from the shoulder all the way down to the hem. So you have a two stripe garment on this. Women didn't always have the stripes, but sometimes they did. Then they would have a mantle, which would be an outer layer, a large rectangle piece of cloth that they would wrap around themselves in various ways. Men and women wrapped them slightly differently, but they would wrap them. Some of the research I did showed that the men often wore more muted colors. So the undyed wool of sheep, kind of like light tans and light browns. Women would often wear darker colors and more brightly colored clothes. And there's rabbinic tradition behind why they had the color differentiation between the genders.
Hmm. Okay, so we also know about Jesus' clothing that he had the swaddling cloths. Can you tell us the significance of that?
The significance of the swaddling cloths really is just that this is what the peasants would do. This terminology is really common among the peasant community. So they would wrap in the clothes. Often a newborn baby would be washed with salt and then wrapped. This works great because babies grow really fast, and so you don't have to buy like, today we have 3 months clothes and 6 months clothes and 12-month clothes. You can just like wrap a little bit differently as the baby gets bigger as you need to. And so these swaddling clothes, things like he was wrapped, he was swaddled and laid in a manger. These are cue words that to the peasant audience of Matthew or Luke, they would be like, oh, that's what I do to my baby. You mean Jesus came to be
Mm-hmm.
one of us? He's not born in a palace where he gets custom made clothes out of linen from his first day. You're just swaddling him and putting him in a manger, which is where we put our babies. And so it's language that's very familiar to the average person, letting them know that Jesus is the one who draws near. He is
Mm.
with you. It picks up on the theme from Matthew where it says, you will name him Jesus. He will save his people from his sins. You will call him Emmanuel, which is God with us.
Let's take a short break to hear how Teach Beyond members celebrate Christmas in different parts of the world.
Hi, this is Cesar from the Dominican Republic. In the Dominican Republic, we celebrate Christmas in a very particular way because we start decorating for Christmas at the beginning of November. And even more, there are people that they start decorating and listening Christmas carols mid-October. So we are very passionate about Christmas. And another fact is that the more important day for us is the 24th. We have a big dinner. We call it in Spanish Nochebuena. So it's not the 25th.
Hi, my name is Vangoi Maina, and I'm currently living in Kenya. And the way we celebrate Christmas in Kenya is a lot of people, if you live in the city, everybody goes up country to the countryside, and there's usually a goat that's slaughtered. So we call that nyama choma. So roast meat is always a favorite feature at Christmas time with lots of family and friends. And a favorite that Kenyans like to have is something called chapati, not the Indian chapati, kind of a Kenyan version of chapati with rice, pilau rice. So that's usually a favorite in most Kenyan homes over Christmas time, with obviously lots of family and friends.
For our weekly spotlight, we are focusing on Enlace English Language Center in Mindo, Ecuador.
Kian, I don't know if you realize that Enlace, the name of this school, is a play on words of sorts.
Really? Tell me, what do you mean?
Well, ENLACE are the first letters in English Language Center, but then Enlace, the word enlace in Spanish, means link. So this language center is a link in their community, and it's also an English language center.
That is fantastic. Those are the things you miss if you only speak one language.
Very true. So to learn more about Enlace, you can visit teachbeyond.org/go or email podcast@teachbeyond.org.
And now back to the conversation with Jessica. You mentioned the manger again and how that's what people are familiar with, laying the baby in the manger. What is a manger? Are we right in when people picture it as like a trough, a horse food trough kind of thing? Is that accurate, or what does that look like?
I would say yes. It would either be water or food. It's probably made out of stone. We typically see it out of wood, kind of a triangle with the little tiny wooden legs. We're probably actually looking more at like a large stone block that was carved out. And you might put water in it or food in it for the animals when they're inside. The ancient cultures primarily co-slept. We see evidence of this in both Old and New Testament co-sleeping. So they're not using the manger as a crib, but periodically you need to put a baby down somewhere safely. As I've thought this through, the manger is an excellent place to put down a child because it's sturdy, it's deep, baby can't roll or go anywhere. So we're going to set the baby down while we go do what we need to do real quick. It's a safe, sturdy place. As I've ruminated on the story, it's also a great place. I imagine the scene. Mary has just given birth. The women are all scurrying around trying to take care of the mother who's just giving birth. She might need stitches. She might need who knows what she's needing. They're trying to wash and take care of the baby. And suddenly a bunch of shepherds are like pounding on the door. This is sacred women's space. And now we have a bunch of shepherds pounding on the door who are saying something about an angel. And the women may have seen like this big bright light off in the distance. So they might be twittering in the background, like, do you know what that big light is about? And now the shepherds are banging on the door and the shepherds want to see the baby. But this is like, we just had a birth. So we'll set him in the manger for safe viewing, kind of like when I remember when my baby sister was born, it was still when hospitals had like the nursery and you could go look at the glass and see the babies and all the little cots. Kind of like that idea. They lay him in the manger. Practically, it's a safe place to keep your baby. But when you have a 5-10 men suddenly barge into your hospital room, it's also a really nice bassinet where it's you don't touch the baby, but you can see the baby. And here's where we will put him so you can see him.
You mentioned the angel, the shepherds there. Now we're bringing in other characters from
Mhm.
outside of the immediate scene. So, can you talk to us more about maybe what we might misunderstand about what the angel looked like and also the significance of the shepherds being involved in this story?
Absolutely. My mom always teases me about the angels because in my nativities, I depict them as warriors. It's called, it's the, we often think of them as a choir, but that Greek word actually means army. So you're not dealing with like pretty la 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 angelic choir. You're dealing with, think more like big burly warriors who I believe are here to protect the savior as much as anything else on the spiritual side, as well as herald his birth.
Mm,
So you're dealing with angels who are extremely terrifying. These are shiny, big, scary warriors that suddenly appear to the shepherds.
mhm,
And the shepherds, I've often heard it taught that they were like the ragamuffin thieves, which actually comes from 5th century Persian rabbis. So we're dealing with 500 years after Jesus was born, thousands and thousands of miles away. Nowhere in scripture or even in the rabbinic writings that happened just within a couple hundred years of Jesus are shepherds viewed poorly.
mm,
So these shepherds could have been priestly shepherds taking care of flocks for the temple, or they could have been just the local peasant men taking care of their family's sheep. Either way, the angels coming to these shepherds is an announcement that when God comes, again, he's not coming to the rich and the
mhm,
powerful and the people you would think, the priests, the high priests, the Sadducees, the Pharisees. He's coming to the lowly people. He's
mm,
coming to the shepherds. Just, I mean, you think about your neighbor Jack next door, who's a car mechanic, and your neighbor Phil, who drives truck. He's just coming to the everyday Joe, blue collar worker guy. And that is who God is drawing in from the very beginning. Not
mhm,
the rich, not the powerful, not the educated, not the religious, the people who were just doing what they needed to do. And God busts in to be like, I'm here and I'm here to
mm,
be with you.
mm, mm. Yeah, that's so good. Is there anyone that we've missed going through the peg dolls besides the magi?
We've talked about the women, the shepherds. I think that's mostly it. I do have a few animals, of course, because they could have had sheep and
Yeah.
whatnot
Yeah.
around. But largely, that's who we have. We're just dealing kind of anybody you would put in a Jewish peasant village in the 1st century is who could
Yeah.
have been there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really amazing to think about how God just surrounds these people and he just puts himself right in the middle of everyday life happenings.
Mm,
The
mm,
angels come and announce in a big way, which it's definitely worth announcing, but he's also just coming in the absolute simplicity of birth
mm.
and day to day life.
Yeah. That's such an interesting juxtaposition that it is a big announcement. This is big news.
Yeah.
And also it is to the peasants, to the, in the midst of the everyday. So that's an important point. So the characters we haven't talked about yet are the magi or the kings,
Yep.
and they often end up right there in the birth
Mhm.
nativity story set that we have, right? So talk to us about them as characters in this story.
The Magi, we don't know when they arrived. Typically, a nativity scene has them there. I get comments periodically like, "Your scene isn't accurate because you have the Magi there in the scene." Well, I'm taking a picture of a scene so that you know what everything looks like, and I can only do that in one go. So you get
Right.
everybody at once. But the Magi, they could have been there. God could have had the star appear however long it took for them to get there beforehand, or
Hmm.
he could have had the star appear when Jesus was born and then however long it took them to get there. Some people have said they must have come later because they were in a house when the Magi arrived. Well, if Jesus was born in a house, he's already there.
Yeah.
So we have no real idea when the Magi arrived, except that Herod killed all the boys 2 years and younger. So we have kind of a 2 year time frame, some time between birth and 2 years, probably closer to 2 years because Joseph and Mary had to get up and flee. And that's a lot easier to do with a toddler than a recently postpartum woman with a newborn.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
going to be really hard to flee.
Hmm.
So the Magi, all the text tells us about them is that they're Magi. We say kings. They weren't kings. They were likely priests or astrologers, maybe Zoroastrian priests from the Parthian religion. And they were from the east. That could have been Persia. That could have been the Nabatean kingdom, which is now, like, if you think of Petra in the Middle East, that's the Nabateans. Or it could have even been down a little bit in Arabia. We're not fully sure, but somewhere out east, these men who are priests, magi's, astrologers, they see the stars and they come.
Hmm. That's so interesting as you share all the different pieces and all the different elements and the people who are not mentioned in the story, but were probably there. And how I don't think about it too deeply about how, the pictures you always see of Joseph and Mary going there is them alone. And
Right.
maybe there was a
Right.
caravan, them having the birth was probably alone, but actually, no, they might have been surrounded by people. And they
Mm.
weren't excluded from the inn, like a big
Yeah.
bustling party in the inn, and they were kicked out. But it
Right.
probably looked very different.
Yeah.
Um, can you describe to us maybe Jewish hospitality and how that plays into it, how they would be welcomed in or not welcomed in, what that would look like for them in this
Yeah.
scene?
The Jewish hospitality is just we take care of our own, we take care of our family. It's an honor shame culture. So to not properly take care of a guest would be deeply shameful on the family and everybody else. One bit of pushback I sometimes get is, well, Mary's pregnant before they're officially married, so wouldn't that be shameful? Maybe they're pushed out because of that. But the text is very clear that they are at least engaged. Matthew makes it sound like they've actually had their wedding by the time Jesus is born. So they may be newlyweds or engaged, but either way, engagement was a official legal contract. And it's discouraged to get pregnant during the engagement period, but you have the legal contract. Like, you have to have official divorce to sever your engagement. So they are protected by that engagement wedding period. So Mary and Joseph wouldn't be experiencing shame, like, oh, she's pregnant out of wedlock. And Joseph choosing to continue on in the engagement and marriage, in essence, is adopting Jesus as his own. If there was any hint that Jesus was an illegitimate child, the Pharisees and the people of Nazareth later on and during his ministry would have thrown that in his face all the time. But instead, they say, we know your father, it's Joseph the carpenter.
Hmm. Hmm.
So Joseph claims Jesus as his own, so that when they arrive in Bethlehem, it's as though they're married, they have the baby. Jewish hospitality would say, we take care of our own, we take care of our family.
Mm.
The people who stay in the inn, per se, would be like the Romans, wandering traders, Gentiles, people who don't have roots to the city, and we're not going to send you there. That would be shameful upon Bethlehem as the city, and their family in particular. Their hospitality could not allow that. They bring them in, they're going to take care of them, they're going to provide
Mm.
for their needs, they're going to watch out for them, protect them, all of those sorts of things.
Wow, this is my brain is just trying to take all of this in. This is so interesting, so many different pieces to be imagining in our minds. So if we think about, now we have all the pieces set, the individual characters, the scene. What about the telling of the story of Jesus' birth and doing that with a historically accurate lens? What is important to keep in mind and what can be kind of the outcome of telling this story with historical accuracy?
I think for me, the biggest thing God just keeps impressing on my heart as I rehearse this story every year is just the concept of Emmanuel, God with us.
Mm.
Last year, I wrote an Advent devotional that kind of used that as the theme and walked through all 24 days, going through it historically accurate, but also bringing in the God with us rather than God not with us, which is what the typical nativity story is. It's God not with us. God's away in a manger. He's pushed out, he's far away, he's not really with us, he's over there. But Emmanuel is God with us in the dirt and the grime and the blood and the noisy sheep of everyday life. And a lot of what I do in my ministry is I'm interfacing and advocating for people with trauma or disability or neurodiversity. And they look at me and they're suffering and they're like, how do I understand God? And what it comes back to so often is that God with us concept. That when we are hurting, when we are suffering, it is God with us that gives us strength, not God out there somewhere, not God far away. It's God with us here and now. And retelling the Nativity story in its historical context shows that was his plan from the beginning. He has always wanted to be in and among his people. That's why after Adam and Eve sin, he immediately comes to them with curiosity and gentleness, asking what happened. When he brought Israel out of Egypt in the Exodus, he puts the tabernacle right in the middle of his people. God's desire is to be with his people by his nature. When he sees us in sin and suffering or joy, he cannot help himself but to draw near to us. So the God with us concept has fundamentally changed how I interpret the Nativity story and how I tell it. It's also been significant for me as a woman and having a daughter thinking it through, because your typical nativity scene has almost no women. There's no, and women aren't named in the passages except for Mary and Elizabeth and then Anna later on. But the original audience would have understood all the women that were surrounding all of this. They would have known they were there because this is how life works to your first century Christian or Jewish person hearing Matthew and Luke. We look for only the things that are explicitly stated because we don't have that intrinsic understanding of how society works. So when you tell it from a historically accurate perspective, it's not that the nativity is loud angels just to men and the women who where's a woman in an original nativity? She's with the innkeeper sending them away. Instead, women are the ones who were the first to touch God. It was always women who were there to touch Jesus in his most vulnerable moments. When he's born, he is incarnated into the womb of a woman. He is born into the hands of a midwife who bathes and cares for him. When he is resurrected, it is another Mary there to grasp his feet. He has this special connection to women that's different, not more or less than his connection to men. The men got the angels. They got the big booming announcement. The women got to be there touching God in the flesh.
Mm,
And so God with us is for all people. It's for the Gentiles who are excluded from the promises of Israel until Jesus comes. It is for the women. It is for the shepherds. It is for the peasants. It's for the religious elite as well, but they completely miss it and choose not to participate. The Magi say, "Where's the King of the Jews to be born?" And they know where he's at. They can tell him. They draw him a map. Go here. But they don't come. They know they have the choice, but they don't come. God is there for those who are willing to be with him.
mm, mm. So good. Well, Jessica, as we wrap up, what encouragement do you have for parents like you, for teachers, for those who are telling this story to children this time of the year? Yeah, what encouragement would you leave them with?
I would just say figuring out how to teach kids about Jesus can feel really overwhelming. Um, don't feel like you have to do it all at once. You can
Mm,
do little bits by little bit. You can just strew crumbs of truth and
mm,
answer more involved questions as they ask them. And
mm,
you can let the children know that they matter to
mm,
Jesus.
mm,
Not only the women, but there could have been children nearby, little kids playing or holding baby Jesus in that home. And they have also always been a part of this nativity and what's going on. God came to be with his people, including children. And Jesus says, "Let the children come to me and do not forbid them." So as we teach, this is incredibly important for our kids to know the nearness of Jesus. They're going to face so many things in their life, some unspeakable things, some joyful things. And I would just say, we can ground our kids that Jesus is near them rather than being a far off, distant God ready to reject them at a moment's notice for a
mm,
failure, but he's a God who draws near. That will fundamentally change how they view God and their ability to attach to God and trust God.
mm, mm. That's great.
Yeah, that is so helpful to think about. I mean, every year we go through Christmas and it's remembering that, oh yeah, God of the universe came down and became
Oh,
a human. And it's shocking every time and changes the way you view who God is and how he relates to you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you for coming on and sharing all these things and shaking up our view of the nativity scene of Christmas.
In the best
Be,
kind of way.
in the best
My
way,
pleasure.
yes. Before we let you go, though, we have one final question we ask all our guests, and that is, what's one thing that's changing your life? So this can be something really big and dramatic, or something small that's just changing your life this week. I'll go first, and then Heather will go, and then you can go last. So you have a little bit of time to think about it. What's changing my life this week is a purchase I made. I bought my kids staffs. I was at the hardware store, and we just bought dowels for them to use because they
Oh
really
my
wanted them.
gosh.
And we are going to see if that was a good decision or not. It has certainly made the week different as I'm watching them and be like, okay, are they going to hit each other in the face, or what are they going to do with these things? So it's been fun and terrifying all at the same time. So that's been changing my life this week.
You're bringing the Christmas story to life. You're not doing it in a shoebox. You're just going to act it all out, is what you're telling us.
Yeah, we're giving them staff for starting there, and then we'll go for clothes next.
That's great. What's been changing my life lately? I recently went to a meetup in my area, and I've met some other like-minded Christian women around my age that are just at other churches, and so it was an interesting opportunity to connect and meet different people. A little bit of mixing up groups that wouldn't normally interact, even though we go past each other in grocery stores and around the area. So I guess making new friends at 36, that's a thing, right?
That's awesome.
What's changing your life lately, Jessica?
It seems kind of silly and it's very simple, but I would say sweatshirts.
Mm.
I'm always cold, so I've always been a sweater person, but this year Texas cannot figure out its weather, and it's been like 50 in the morning and 80 in the afternoon, so you have to wear layers.
Yeah.
And I've discovered as a neurodivergent person that the feel of sweaters on my bare arms I do not like. But
Ah,
sweatshirts are fantastic, so they can keep me warm and I can wear the short sleeves.
right.
And yeah, I never used to wear sweatshirts at all, so this year they are literally changing my
That
life.
is great. Are you more of a crew neck or like hoodie sweatshirt? This is really nitty gritty now.
Hoodie
Hoodie.
sweatshirt.
Okay.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Jessica, for joining us for this conversation. And yeah, as Kian said, just helping us to think differently and more informed as we enter this Advent season. So
My
thanks for being
pleasure.
here.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun.
I really enjoyed that conversation. It's really interesting to think about the birth of Jesus being a more communal event than an individual story about Joseph and Mary being on their own and kind of them against the world.
I agree. There's so much that I'll be thinking about all throughout the Advent season for sure. Well, Kian and I serve with an organization called Teach Beyond. Education plays a big role in missions, and Teach Beyond is a part of that.
As followers of Jesus, Teach Beyond is a global community providing transformational education services as part of God's ongoing mission to transform individuals and communities into all he intends.
Want to learn more and get involved? Visit teachbeyond.org or follow us on social media.
To help more people find the podcast and hear about Teach Beyond, we'd love it if you would leave a rating or review and share the show with a friend. Be sure you're subscribed or following the show on the platform where you listen so you never miss an episode.
And as always, you can reach us at podcast@teachbeyond.org. We'll see you next week. And in honor of our continued celebration of Teach Beyond's 70th anniversary and this Advent season, stick around to hear some Christmas music from the Jans team.
There's a song in the air, there's a star in the sky, there's a mother's deep prayer, and a baby's low cry, and the star rains its fire while the beautiful sing, for the manger of Bethlehem cradles a King. There's a tumult of joy for the wonderful birth, for the Virgin's sweet boy is the Lord of the earth. The star rains its fire while the beautiful sing, for the manger of Bethlehem the light of the sky lie the ages impaired, and that song from afar has swept over the world. Every hearth is aflame, and the beautiful sing in the homes of the nations that Jesus is King. We rejoice in the light, and we echo the song that comes down through the night from the heavenly throng. Hey, we shout to the lovely angel there.